Good morning, everybody. John Spielkel here for GAI Insights. We're going to give the Gen AI news briefing. Holding down the fort today, we have Ankaj, Paul, and me. We've got 6 wonderful articles, fascinating new stuff from the AI scientist, a fully automated knowledge discovery machine or not, all the way down to a tool Sandbox that does a very interesting set of evaluations of sequential state activity of an LLM as it uses APIs and other tools to solve its challenges. All right, great. Let's go ahead and get started. Ankaj, if you could give us the first one, the AI scientist, please.
Sure, Paul. Can you bring up my screen, John? Yes. Okay. The first one that we have for today comes from Sakana.ai. So they are a Japanese Gen AI company, and they have launched an AI scientist.
Yeah, Paul, what do you think?
I thought this was definitely interesting. This is an article talking about how AI can actually start exploring new areas and in the scientific area. And I had as important. I think this is an important intellectual boundary condition for our AI leaders.
Yeah.
How about you, John?
Yeah, I was important hidden for essential because I used to do these things for a living, right, when I was an academic, and it automates the full process from here's an idea that we might do in terms of, hey, here's a new concept for diffusion models, and then it researches the existing literature, it comes up with the idea, it writes the piece. It creates synthetic reviewers, which then review the piece, it improves the piece, and then it's ready to publish. I found it incredibly important because what a lot of people who aren't in academia don't understand is that the whole method of knowledge creation is being changed with these large language models. And that is I think that's relevant to any AI leader. There's at least 2 things going on in the way I think about it. The whole thing's becoming more computable. And what do I mean by that? You have the representations of the knowledge domain. You have these component parts, and then the methodology by which this stuff is stored has changed. So you look at Jupyter notebooks and so forth. You're taking the data and the insights and the writing and the analysis and putting it all into one document, which is then live and available. So it's really you combine that, the fact that more and more of the full value chain of knowledge creation is getting published, which wasn't true in traditional publishing. You wouldn't necessarily put your data set out there or your model and so forth. And now with this meta capability, I was actually going toward essential because it's starting in software. I think it's going to go everywhere. It's going to be.
John, keep going. And I think let me get your view on this. And as this says, open scientific discovery, but why would it have to be scientific? It could be any domain of knowledge discovery, right?
Yes.
So business and research knowledge at a Goldman Sachs, or knowledge about fertilizer optimization in certain soil plants for something.
Yeah, that's why I think it's this a powerful new approach that sits on top of an increasingly digitized knowledge base. And also not just digitized, it's represented. If I have a Jupyter notebook, I've got the algorithms, I've got the data, I've got the interpretation. That's a very different transfer of knowledge, right? Because I'm not only feeding you, I'm giving you, the blue apron of how to do another meal.
Right.
I mean?
And pre Jupyter, that was in the researcher's head, basically, right?
Or their databases or whatever. Yeah. I mean, generally when I was doing that kind of work, I'm old enough. I mean, we've had it on a Series 1 machine and then onto a PC and then a whatever, right? And that was out there. Okay, so we're going to give that one an essential. Ankaj, next.
Okay, the next one comes from Google. So Google has launched ChatGPT voice mode competitor in Gemini Live.
Yeah. Got it. It must be so exciting to be, in these development teams. I mean, it's like, oh my God, we got to catch up with OpenAI. This is a product announcement, but I was leaning toward essential on this one for a couple of reasons. First of all, Google obviously major supplier, probably number two, maybe number three compared to OpenAI and Microsoft, but in the top three. And this announces not only the new capabilities of the models, the ability to interrupt it, have much better voice choices, more natural interaction. If you've seen any of the simulations of these, they're just mind-blowing. I mean, you have something that is much more akin to a human conversation than you had before. It's not like talking to Siri or Alexa or Google Voice. This is much more powerful. In addition, they announced some of their phones, like the new Pixel folding phones and so forth, that end up with an 8-inch square screen when you put them out. So I was leaning toward essential on this one, although I usually don't for product announcements. But if you're the AI leader, I think you need to understand what Gemini's doing. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are certainly important vendor. We've talked a lot about voice being an absolute critical UI advancement coming here. It does feel like very much catch up, and certainly catch up in the demo world. Lucinda adroitly asked us if OpenAI released a voice part. I actually don't know, although Michael says it looks like they have. So we can get that thing. Yeah, and I certainly had important, John. Important, but I'll also respect the chalk choice.
Okay, yeah, let's give it essential. It's short, it's interesting. All right, so we start off with 2 E's here. All right, Ankaj, Klarna.
So this one by Clara AI chatbot. So someone has gone into details of how Klarna's AI chatbot performs after it was launched with very sort of good set of numbers by Klarna in terms of cost reduction and how they were able to remove full-time equivalents with their new sort of chatbots. So this article goes into details of what happens behind that and how Klarna has put in some safeguards for hallucination and stuff.
Yeah, well, just before we head into Klarna, I know that they say the pun is the lowest form of humor. At least my mother used to tell me that. But Mike says, no one's going to succeed. Going back to the voice thing before, Mike Novak says no one's going to succeed without a sound strategy. So, hail to the pun. Well done, Michael. But I do think that your sound strategy does matter. All right, back to Klarna. Paul, what do you think here?
I thought it was interesting. Nothing breakthrough. Yes, Klarna, I think kudos to Klarna for sharing a lot more on what they're doing, but optional for AI leader. I didn't find anything new in here.
Yeah, I mean, basically walked back and forth, and Klarna made this huge claim of, automating, was it a third or quarter or a third of all customer service interactions? We'll see. But none of the data seems to be conflicting with that. The author here, Gregory, notes that it's level 1. If those familiar with customer service, there's usually level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 3 being a higher escalation, more sophisticated. Points out that Klarna is likely to automate level 1 service. Sure, that makes sense. But I'd give it an optional. All right. So 2 E's and an O. Akash, next up.
The next one again comes from OpenAI. So OpenAI seems to have introduced new sort of reasoning functionality into a ChatGPT update. But OpenAI has clarified that it's not a new model, but it's a new reasoning framework that they have included in the ChatGPT.
Yeah, our friends here at VentureBeat, a beat that we use a lot. Yeah, there's some speculation on X and others. I still miss Twitter. Don't you miss Twitter instead of X? Whatever.
Yeah.
The X that had they put in chain of reasoning and so forth, and the folks from OpenAI said, no, we're not. This isn't chain of reasoning. It's just an improvement based on user feedback. So I gave this definitely an optional. There's some reports of nothing bad in terms of, at least the early reports, of the model doing anything crazy or anything. And not a big step forward in reasoning better quality, but not scientifically or broadly reported, simply a few anecdotes. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I totally agree, John. Optional. I do want to know, we have noted Ankaj a lot of venture beat articles. I forget who's the guy who started it, Matt Marshall. I don't know him, but he's out of the San Jose Mercury News, which used to be the go-to key. So they really are doing some good jobs in terms of covering important stuff that we care about. But this particular article, so kudos for them, I think. But this particular article is optional.
Yeah, I mean, you can really feel. I mean, even I went to their event. You can really feel their presence in Silicon Valley. Having been down to the San Jose Mercury News, God rest his soul, it may still be around. It's a shadow of his former self, but it used to be the tech rag of the newspapers, right? And obviously, good work here. Akash, next.
Yeah, the next one comes from our friends at Multion, and it talks about Agent Q, and they are saying that it performs a lot better on various evaluation parameters.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they make some pretty bold claims in this thing about, self-healing and, it can, self-healing agents, and agents are so important. They're using, Monte Carlo tree search as one of the critical things. And then the challenge with Monte Carlo tree search, which is a nice technique for multi-step agent control, is that you still have to have the representation. So you have to have an environment that is relatively structured, so that you can generate for the Monte Carlo simulations in different parts of the decision tree exactly what the alternatives are. If things are fuzzy or the representations are not clear, it doesn't help you much. So, yeah, I think the claim is way overblown. In semi-structured or structured environments, using this technique to create possible pathways and have the agent behavior be less rigid, sure. Does that, match to these mega claims of self-healing agents? No, not so much. So I gave this an optional because I think that they're over their skis. It's an interesting technique, maybe important for the folks that are actually building out your agents, but so few of our clients right now are building out agents. They're busy just dealing with understanding and adaptation of the core models. So I gave it an optional. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, optional as well. Some folks may know I'm at the AI Force show here in Vegas. Huge show. I think about 5,000 attendees, at least 120 vendors, which is more than double last year. And I've been speaking to dozens of them, and it is overwhelming the amount of claims from just the signage and to the people you're talking about here. So, I think the research, it continues to go at a rapid pace. I think the claims go at a rapid pace. But for our AI leader, I think what's real is the defining thing, and this is still research, so definitely optional.
All right, we come at the big O. Last one up here, Tool Sandbox.
Yeah, the last one comes from Apple, and it talks about Tool Sandbox, which is a stateful, conversational, interactive, educational benchmark for LLM tool use.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting. I don't know geographically where this work is being done. It looks like it might be being done out of their Chinese office, but I'm not sure. Again, it seems like a number of the Chinese researchers are going for higher level conceptions of models and other, improvements and activities, which I think is really interesting to keep an eye on. Yeah, I had this as important, and the reason is that this evaluation framework seems to do a much better job of evaluating the large language models in terms of how they are interacting with tool use by understanding a better evaluation of what the reality is and what the possible states are, and how well the tool manages the ability to interact with those states. So if I'm writing an app that's poking out to a search function or poking out to the weather or a math function on Wolfram Alpha and so forth to do either multi-step reasoning or chain of thought reasoning and so forth, which of the LLMs are better at supporting that approach, where you're going to do what we've talked about before is compound AI or multi-agent AI or multi-expert AI or multi-model AI. And this tool Sandbox is an evaluation tool that does a better job of helping you understand which of the models are good to do that. So I gave it an important for that reason, but not essential, because I think this notion of compound AI is with us and will continue to grow.
So you had important, John.
Yes. Yeah, important because I think that the multi-agent thing is so important, and then for the AI leader to have for the leading AI leader to have a tool to help them evaluate which of the large language models are better at managing multi-agent, multi-tool capability, that this tool Sandbox helps you with that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The one of the questions, John, and I'll just share for the audience that we're going around is asking people, what do we call this category?
Yes.
Is this thing called CRM or compound or enterprise intelligence and it's interesting how many vendors I talked with yesterday talk about that they view their core value add as this orchestration layer, this application framework that's
Yes.
including multiple models and multiple agents here. So I think in that sense, the next layer understanding of what these tools are and how you evaluate them and how you route them is going to be an important part of the development stack over the next 12 to 18 months here. So yeah, important. Sounds great.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I mean, I remember back to the PC operating system wars, and it's like, you start looking at this, and then the middleware wars, right? I mean, this is so much about this orchestration layer and dealing with the semantic operating system, or whatever we're going to call it,
Right.
is in development. And as folks may know when we're talking to some of our clients who are in production, this is such an important part. And there's two parts of this. First, the vendors, even the big vendors, Amazon and so forth, aren't providing the security layer and the management layer that they need. In addition, I believe the smart clients are also very wary about going with vendors, even if they had a good solution, because there's enough potential for lock-in with your prompts and the models and so forth to then commit to a management layer, which, if history's any guide, will generally be make it easier to work with the major cloud provider than it will be to have an open system. That they're worried about that kind of lock-in as well.
Right. And John, what's interesting was it became very clear to me yesterday, also talking to a lot of people here, is this in this market, it's moving so fast, obviously on the news side, which we're dealing with today, but also on the component side, which vector database you're using, how are you doing in staging, everything else. So this whole notion that you've got tons of components moving around, being introduced at all the time. The customer just wants a framework or some basic thing to solve a business problem. And there's this whole category of vendors coming in that are picking out best of breed, and as your framework here, pick whatever you want, and that's got a cost, or maybe like way on the other end is like a custom GPT. It says we already picked something, just put it in there, and you don't have any choice over it, or something in the middle is real value in this orchestration layer. And as we talk about agents, just going to get more complicated and more fluid.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of these markets, and I'm trying to remember, there's a book by an MIT strategy professor that basically talked about how a lot of these markets go from consolidated and simple to complex and open again, and then consolidated and simple. And I think we're going through one of the mega cycles of going complex again, because I think for me, cloud it redefined the execution architecture, but it really didn't redefine the application architecture and how we think about control and some of the fundamental things that go on in a complex, high-performance compute environment. But this is, what I mean? Because now we're not only, we're all the way down into the hardware. We're talking GPUs, LPUs, other things like that, Snapdragon chips on the phone and so forth, right? So we're all the way down in the hardware. The control logic is up in the air. Like, okay, where are the quote-unquote operating system functions going to be? The performance attributes are up in the air. What are we doing for training? What are we doing for inference? The cost structure and the cost model and the payment models are up in the air, on-prem, cloud, so forth. The vendors are up in the air. We haven't seen something like this since, if you go way back before IBM and GE slugged it out on the standard operating system in IBM 1, right? GE had a machine operating system before IBM did with the 360. So the mainframe thing ended up, IBM won that one. And then, you look at what happened with client server architectures and, what happened with the modularization of capability into databases, and, Oracle won a big piece of that. I think we're back at one of those kind of, Cambrian moments. If we thought about an evolutionary term, we have this Cambrian explosion, this explosion of stuff that hasn't settled down yet, that, the mammals are on top.
Really a great Cambrian explosion, I think, is great analogy, John, because one thing that also came up in the show was just, again, how being in production separates keeps saying men from the boys, the women and the men from the boys and the girls.
Dreamers from the doers, or whatever.
Thank you. Better old school days. But how different they actually get in production, though. You've got to solve the full solution for the customer, and the customer breadth of solutions is so varied.
Yeah.
I want the source of truth over there. I want to use a Snowflake, but Snowflake charges for every time I do a query, and that's expensive here. Or I've got this notion that you've got new capability, but to get the last mile solved is even more variability at the end, just makes the whole industry solution set incredibly wide.
Yes. Well, I just, in terms of closing thoughts here, I have a couple. You may as well, Paul. The one thing, and I've been having a lot of conversations with different organizations about kind of their maturity. And I get more and more convinced that a good way to look at this thing is to think about this thing being this particular revolution of generative AI meeting AI, and then going back and redoing Wynn's work, the words, images, numbers, and sounds, cognitive work, which is such a big part of our economy, especially in the United States, that thinking about this thing in terms of educate, operate, transform. That is, there's so little knowledge in most organizations of what these things are and how they work. You can't hop over that, because once you jump over that and start talking about applications and so forth, the organization can't admit it doesn't know what people are talking about, and that's a bad place to be. So so ongoing education, and we saw that at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan that we just wrote up in Harvard Business Review. That ongoing education is critical. Operate, the ability to decentralize and have different people, just like in the quality movement, go chase down value and put it together in an integrated way for programmatic transformation, picking up, as my father used to say, save pennies to spend dollars. Right, you can go find money, but real applications, and that then inskills the organization to not only execute but also to see other opportunities. So in the operate phase, that's incredibly important. And then you can start reimagining the business in a way that you have the organizational capability to do something with it. Because if you have a couple of geniuses that have this reimagination of a business, and you're inside a large organization, one of the things that we used to teach about at Harvard Business School, I certainly experienced as an executive, having an idea and doing something in the context of a large organization that is successful and has routines is a totally different animal. And a lot of people, I think a lot of these startups don't understand the institutional constraints of people who have hundreds or thousands of people reporting to them that have complex responsibilities. They know it kind of in their head, but they don't have an intuitive feel for what this means. So I really do believe the educate part's a 12 to 18 month journey, the operate part's a 12 to 18 month journey, and then the transform can begin that. Now you can think about it and start doing experiments in the transform part earlier, but in terms of really making an organization reinvent itself, I think it's on that kind of a time scale with those issues.
Yeah. And John, jump up a little. I'm interested in your point of view as well. It seems like on the Henry Ford automation line, we went from guild to an automation line, and what a physical process was relatively straightforward, right? Put wheels on, and then that got automated. And then now we have in this cognitive layer, because it's so varied, it doesn't feel like it's going to go down to this lowest common denominator at scale and volume, because it's so damn important for value creation here. So, the goal is not to get the lowest common denominator at scale on drug research, but to continue to be wide and explore new knowledge bases, going back to our very first article today.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, what's interesting, I used to do a talk on a thing that said, if only software would rust, right? because the physics of the world makes it easier to put design constraints into powerful new technologies. Because most people get lost, myself included, when you have so many degrees of freedom that you can do anything, it's hard to do anything. You know what I mean? And so, and that's why if you look in the history of business designs, the most popular business design that has employed the most people on the planet, as far as I can tell, is the franchise system. McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, the Marriott Hotel, or whatever. And the reason for this is that you take a lot of the design variables off the table. So you don't have to think of a whole new hotel or a whole new restaurant. Right here are the component parts, and you can put them together. And here's what. So you use somebody else's design. That is the stuff that leads to scale. Is when you take the degrees of freedom out and you make it modularized and componentized. The challenge of cognitive work is we don't have physics to constrain what we might do. And and so that's just a more abstract way of agreeing with you, in terms of with Ford, you have, okay, this is what we can do with iron, this is what we can do with aluminum, this is how fast we have to get this crane and move this thing. You don't have that in cognitive world, right? And so that makes the design problem even harder, right? Which is anyway, there's Alan Kay, the creative object-oriented programming, has a lot to say about this, about the relationship between people who really understand mathematics and biology in the context of complex symbol systems, because they are living systems, unlike a manufacturing organization.
But John, it's just another reinforcement. But boy, are we not in Kansas anymore. This is a whole new world that we're walking into the last 2 years and headed into the next 30.
Yeah, but I do. We talk about people getting cognitive vertigo and so forth. I do often remember the William Gibson quote, "The future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed." When you and I talk to AI leaders in production, Gen AI leaders in production, they are in a totally different mindset than traditional organizations. They understand things that are going to take organizations real commitment to go understand from an operating standpoint. And the vendors, I don't think, are doing a very good job of understanding the lack of understanding. And the vendors don't, the vendors are just starting to understand the process and operational complications, as we were talking about, whether it's regulatory compliance or whether it's, auditability and so forth, all the things that large scale regulated organizations worry about, which are the majority of some of the highest, market capitalizations in the world, barring the technology companies. Anyway, it's interesting because some people are really leaving. All right. Anything else?
That's in my, well, actually, one other thing, John, I'm following up on our learning lab this week on, does open source actually exist, and what is it, and is it really open, low cost, but not traditional open source? I'm very interested in people who are actually using open source models and have critiques of license models. So people are doing that online, can reach out to me. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Yes. And yeah, I do think we are going to have to create new categories here with semi-open or whatever, right? Yeah. When Llama drops a $405 billion model that, doesn't have the weights, doesn't give you the source code, doesn't give you the source data, is that open? I don't know.
I think it's free. I think it's a free code. I don't think it's open. It's just free.
Right. Yeah. And we're going to have to dive back into that. All right. So we got a EOOOI. All right. Got some good reading here today. Interesting stuff, and moving the ball forward for our AI leaders. We will see you all tomorrow.
And like us on YouTube if you were enjoying the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Please do.